My deck is still visible to you?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Improving Tech Talks. We will be starting momentarily. We're going to give everyone a few moments to shuffle on in, and we'll get started right at 12:02. Okay. Hello again, everyone. Thank you for joining Improving Talks. We're kicking off Data Month. Our presenter today is Don Sawyer, who is the Director of Data Engineering out of our Minnesota office. Don's presentation is scheduled to fill most of the hour, so Q&A will be handled at the end, and I will cut this introduction short. Take it away, Don.
All right, thank you, and good afternoon or morning to wherever you are in the United States. Welcome to this Tech Talk. As he stated, I am the Director of Data Engineering. I've been here about 2.5 years at Improving. Been in the field of software engineering and thereabouts for over 2 decades. I've been working on software engineering and applying engineering principles across data science, engineering, and software for a long time, specifically around agility and test automation and test-driven data engineering. I have also used a lot of my learnings and built and taught a course at the University of Minnesota on data engineering and architecture. And one of my favorite things is, for those of you that know me, I very firmly believe in testing. And so I'll often say one test is better than no tests, and that's always. And I am talking about automation in that sense. So moving right into this, I have 4 topics in here, but they're pretty vast. And this is a pretty complicated set of topics, especially as an engineer. But I'm hoping to bridge the gap between product, business, and engineering today. Now, one sort of disclaimer I'll state about this particular presentation is that this really is the tip of the iceberg. It's only an hour presentation. It encapsulates years of trial and research and some of the errors and mistakes that I've made or that I've seen teams make. But hopefully what I do hope you get out of this is that it does help generate ideas around how you can start to shift towards a more product-focused strategy within your data platforms. To start about this topic, one of the first things that's worth comparing and contrasting is a data product and a data project. The product mindset's a little bit different, and it's a big journey to go from a project or technical focused artifact to a product. So a quick comparison here is what I'm going to go through here. So first, what is the focus of a product versus a project? The product itself is focused on delivering value and insights that enable your organization. So what you want to build when it comes to a data standpoint is, do I have the right data assets to be able to move my business forward? For data projects, this is typically predefined scope. So you have specific tables and databases and things that you want in your data platform, and they're governed by a schedule and or budget expectations. Now, how do you measure success between these two? And this is where the difference really starts to take hold. In a product focus, you are focused on measuring return on investment and the organizational value that is also enabling additional organizational actions from the data. In a project, you're measuring success by completed tasks and delivered assets. And those are usually with regard to being within that budget and scope. So what are you funding between these two? In a product, you're funding a team that's delivering on a value stream or some set of organizational objectives So these are things that people can discuss and care about. In a project, you're often funding data assets or a platform solution, which tends to make it a little bit difficult to understand, is this investment worth my time? There's a number of resources that are out there. I picked two, put them in this slide deck, so you're more than happy to go and research on some of those, and I could probably share some others. I probably should post them to LinkedIn after this as well. So what are some of the challenges that come across when you're working on a data project and not taking that product focus? Think about it this way. A project often looks very technical, and so discussions become technical, and folks that are not technical end up having difficulty. So this is something like bring the ocean and port shipment information into our data platform. And you'll notice I'm going to use actually supply chain for most of the examples within this slide, because I have some good learnings from my time spent in supply chain. But really, this is asking to deliver tables, rows, columns, databases. How does a user define the acceptance criteria for data being available? Or as the data, can they even determine if it's usable? Whereas on a product focus, the objective in this that you're going to go for is, I'm going to reduce shipping vendor delays by 10%. This is something that delivers measurable organizational value, and you can start to break down the insights that will meet these user needs. So you're going to see that a lot of things are focused around what are the insights. Some of the challenges that I've run across when going down that data project focus, is that data is really a technical concept. Now I'll talk about business data and I'll talk about technical data within this presentation. When I'm talking about technical data, these are things like joins, nulls, data quality, tables, rows, columns, all those things that make up the technical nature of data within your platform. When you're talking about technical data, this is where the user starts to disconnect, and it's really difficult to understand what the user acceptance criteria will be, which makes story writing hard in an agile world. Then it gets, as you get more mature within your data assets, rationalizing the nuances within the data with business folks becomes difficult if you don't have a common language. If you're using things like joins and nulls and uniqueness and all of these types of technical concepts, it's hard to understand, and for the business person to help you move through that challenge. Like, let's say you're talking about something where you have a relationship that's defined and you find data where there is no relationship. So these alternate data scenarios aren't usually discussed, but when they are difficult. The next thing is that data investments, I'm finding, often have an unknown ROI. We're pouring money into our data platform, but how do we know that that money that's being spent is efficient and we're getting value out of it, or even getting enough measurable value to justify it? A lot of times the measurement of success is revolving around the existence of data, not if the organizational goals are met. And when I talk about organizational goals, I'm talking about things like OKRs, or maybe you're just looking at value streams. What happens over time with a data project, because it's so technical, is that engagement with the business starts to become challenging. What this leads to is a lower understanding of the data, the transformations, and even the data quality. This means that you make more mistakes, and then sometimes I've even seen that the business loses trust in the data platform. From a technical perspective, I've also found that without a good common understanding of what the data represents, developers aren't exactly clear on how they're going to test the functionality of their pipelines, as well as what data quality should be and how to measure that. And then lastly, when data issues do arise, so things like a data quality issue, the technologists really struggle to get advice from the stakeholders. And so they can only use exploratory analysis to help rationalize what the quality should be. So for the audience at this point, think about this internally. I've got a question. You don't have to answer it here, but this is one that strikes home to me often, which is, given the significant investment in data platforms at your organization, how do you determine if that investment is providing a net value to the organization? Is it just the existence of building machine learning models or reports? Or is it the existence of data? Or is it actually measuring business advancement from the investments that you're making? You do need to have an understanding of how the data assets that you build will enable value through insights and through analytics. So let's get into, how do we determine what that right product really is, and what are the insights that are valuable to my organization? Now, in the end, It's your business and stakeholders that are often funding a lot of the work that you're doing and helping drive the organizational priority. So we should probably focus around that. I'm just going to really walk through 3 data lifecycle frameworks. There's so many out there, but these are 3 that I've used and 3 that I like, but these are not the end all solution, and they all have their different purpose. The first one is the big data analytics lifecycle. I actually use this one in my class, which is largely engineers, but and it helps them organize how they move a project from start to finish. But what we focus on throughout the course is actually the business question. What is that business problem definition, and how do we understand that? And then we talk about how does that help the technology decisions that we're about to make. The next one is CRISP DM. This stands for the Cross-Industry Standard Process for Data Mining. This is a standard process that's often used within the data mining workflow. So again, it's trying to organize the process and not just building code and hoping that it works out. And the last one, which I'm actually going to go in depth in this presentation because it's really good at organizing your thoughts around what your data product is supposed to be, is called the Information Product Canvas. There's a really good description of this. You can search for the Information Product Canvas and the Data Engineering Podcast, where the I believe was the owner of agiledata.io had a very good conversation, and that's actually what turned me on to this and exploring this particular methodology. But there's one thing that's common between all 3 of these, and that's the fact that there is some level of business understanding or some sort of business process that needs to happen. That's because the business is what needs insights. You build a better data product if the business and the technical teams are collaborating. Understand that collaboration with the business is going to be hard because engineers like to talk about data as a technical concept, and business users talk about data regarding how they see the business. And we'll go into that a little bit later too. Now, there's this other flow that I like to incorporate. And this is a way for me to organize some of my thoughts around the collaboration between the business and the technologists. But it also illustrates where I see a lot of the gaps within some of the organizations that we work with. And I call this insight mapping. So the first thing that we start with is the value definition. And this is your organizational value. A lot of organizations have OKRs or KPIs or some other measurements that they value as part of moving their business forward from a strategic perspective. These organizational goals are what influence then what business questions or what insights will help me get to those organizational goals. What are some of the questions that I can answer to be able to take good action to be able to move my business forward? Once I have the insights that I would like to develop and those map back to those OKRs, for example, now I can understand what are the business events that are needed to be able to answer those questions. And this is actually built into the Information Product Canvas. This mapping is validating that it's helping to validate that the business questions that I have the data available, and it's actually in business terms so that I can collaborate with the business and the technical teams. But also those insights and questions should be mapping back to the OKRs. So I've got this check and balance in place. Now, once we understand the business events, so the business data, things like a shipment was made, a bill of lading, a arrival to a port, those are all business events. Those then can be mapped by the technical teams down to the things that they care about. What I often see is somebody provides the value or the desired insight. Maybe they're not even that. They might just request some data, and the technical team goes straight into gathering data sets. Well, one of the best practices that I also like to promote is creating your data domain contracts and your data models. The contracts are the point in which everybody agrees and can understand what the data is going to look like and what some of the SLAs are. Once you actually have developed your contracts, now you can start development, things like ingestions and transformations, and these can be done in parallel. But these contracts, you can actually start to map to the data sets. And the data sets will map to the contracts, which will map to the business events, which will then map back to the desired business questions, and then back to the overall organizational value. I'm going to go a little deeper into this and how this is met by the Information Product Canvas. So here's the Information Product Canvas. Now I don't want to read a whole slide to you, but I did want to put enough on here to help guide me, but also for the deck afterwards that folks can see what I'm talking about. But there's a number of sections on here. But what it is it's a framework for capturing the value needs of the organization while also being able to prioritize what the data product that's being built. The goal of a data product isn't so that you have data that's available. To me, it's to make it usable. And one of the ways to make it usable is to involve and collaborate with the folks that are going to be using it. So let's go in a little bit deeper into some of the different sections in here and how they add value to your product, and also how those will help the technical teams themselves. The first thing is a product name. Now, it might not seem like it's a very big deal to have a product name, but if you've got hundreds of these things, the product name is going to be important because it actually helps you to start that common language between technical leaders, technical developers, business leaders, product owners, and other folks within the organizational team. When you're talking about things, now that you have a named item, everybody knows what that means. So think about this. Which would resonate to a wider stakeholder audience? Ocean shipping and status data, or ocean and port shipment delays? Ocean shipping and status data, depending on your audience and the lens that they look through, could mean just about anything. Whereas ocean and port shipment delays tells me this product is responsible for understanding the ocean and port shipment delays. The other thing that's a part of this top upper right corner is the product owner, which may not be assigned right away. But when these documents are retrieved or someone's trying to prioritize them, you know who the product owner is and who you can answer questions to or from. The next part about this is the usage of the product. And so this is some of the basic usage that I'd say as a technologist, some of these things are really important to me because I'm always asking this question, and it actually becomes a conflict point sometimes. Let's start with the personas. Really, who's going to use this? This is a common and core concept to agile product definitions. It helps you understand what types of business activities they care about. What are some of the skill sets that are required to interact with the product? Maybe some other subject matter expertise. Maybe you need to go find some folks that have some other expertise within your business. But it also is going to validate with the type of product that you're delivering if that's going to be feasible based on their technical skill sets. Now, the type of product is what is it? Is it a dashboard? Is it an API? Is it a feed? Machine learning model? What is this type of product? This can actually be used to then validate, are the personas going to be able to use this product effectively, or what training might be required? But what this is also going to help you understand is this going to help you understand the technology stack and some of the infrastructure requirements that might be required. Maybe you're using Power BI. Maybe you don't have Power BI stood up yet, or you don't understand, you don't have a data dashboarding technology. This is going to help inform you of some of the new things that you're going to have to explore from a technical perspective. And the last thing is one of the most important things and arguments that I often see between technologists and business folks, which is the data sync. How often is data required and when is it actually needed? A lot of times folks say, well, when do you need the data? Well, as soon as it's available, or right away, or in real time. And a technologist might say, okay, we can do that. But you know what? The data sync also informs the complexity of the infrastructure that you're going to have to build. A real-time feed is much more complex than a daily feed. In addition, I've had some examples in my past where the business is asking for a daily report. And let's say that daily report is using Nielsen data. And then the technologist is going to come back and say, well, the Nielsen feed is only once a month. Then you have to make a new decision. But this is the starting point for understanding some of the feasibility and of that product, and maybe even help with some of the prioritization. Okay, so now let's go into getting that value. So how do we define the value using the information product canvas? The value is going to be can first be articulated through the vision. A lot of times a leader or a colleague wants to understand what the product is all about. This is really your elevator pitch. And what you're going to use this for is when you're talking to a leader and you're having a discussion around what the value of the product is going to be, this is going to give you the smallest set of data that you need to fully describe the product. The next piece on here is the outcomes and the actions. This is where you start to put a little bit more teeth to the vision that's out there. So what organizational outcomes are you expecting to get from this? This is a lot of times the hardest part of the process, because a lot of times we skip straight from the idea of the data to actually getting the technical data. But in reality, a lot of collaboration is actually required to be able to get to the stakeholders to articulate why that's important. Much of the actions that they do as a part of their job and how they measure their domain and how they're built into them is actually kind of difficult to articulate. I kind of compare it to driving sometimes. I know why I drive to work. I know how to drive to work. And I can actually give you the route to get from my house to work. But how do I determine if I need to take another route? What if I have a different starting point? These are alternate flows that often need to come out of these outcomes and actions. And as you drill into these outcomes and actions in the business questions, you're going to start to hash out some of these alternate scenarios. So what are some of the questions that you might ask as far as getting the outcomes and actions? Well, one of them is quite simple. What actions will you take if you have this information? This is a good justification for really rationalizing why I'm delivering the data that I'm delivering. And you should also be digging into the specifics at that point. This is going to give you additional requirements for building out your product. Another question might be, what are some of the uncommon scenarios that could influence a different action? So in a driving scenario, what if there's construction? And why do you take that different action? Again, this is getting to that technical logic. If this is a collaboration with the technical team, this is also helping to understand some of the transformation logic that we're going to have to explore. And then lastly, how does the information or action contribute to your organizational goal? You should still be tying that back to an OKR or some other organizational goal at this point. Now, let's break that outcome and that action into the business questions. So this is where you're getting down to more granular questions that you're going to ask that help you solve or make up that outcome. And often what I find is that the business question is often skipped. But to me, and in fact, I center my course around this particular topic, is it is really the most important because it's going to inform so many different decisions along the way. For example, when you're having a robust discussion with your business, you can start to dig into those business questions. And this is where some of the really fun conversations, I should say fun, like, how do you calculate that? And they go, what do you mean, how do you calculate that? How do you define that? If you have a relationship between two things, how does X relate to Y? And does that relationship always exist? Now, how would these have been asked from a technical perspective? For the relationship one is, okay, does this always have a relationship, and is it one to many to that table? Is it one to one? But those questions from a technical perspective are likely going to be difficult for a business person or a product owner to answer. Now, what else does the business question help you enable? It also enables really your determination of success or failure. Did you answer the questions, and do they meet the organizational goals? These are all things that everybody can understand at this point. It's also going to help you map your business events to your supporting data and also validate that they're meeting the organizational goal that's expected. So that validation of the outcomes, the personas, the types, and the synchronization frequency are all validated by these business questions. And one thing I'll get into a little bit later is, how do these contribute to what the technologist needs? Not just the data transformations, but some of the other more complex needs. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. So now let's talk a little bit about the business data. So we've got business questions. Well, what are those business questions aiming to solve? Well, they're aiming to measure or take action upon things that are happening within the business. They're not taking action based on rows and columns. They're taking actions based on business events. So this is why you can break down those business questions into the core business events that are being measured. Again, we're going to use the business terms to do this because it's going to form that common collaboration between the business team and the technical team. Even though this often gets skipped, I do find it is also one of the most important ways for business subject matter experts and data technologists to collaborate. What you can now do once you define the core business events is you're now going to be able to look at what are some of the data sources that are going to service that information. A lot of times I work with potential data sources because I have to still explore that and make sure that it does map correctly to the business events. It's going to help me understand some complexity and some trade-offs on data scope if I know some of the data is very complicated. But it's also going to help me understand between the business subject matter experts and the data experts. It's going to help with some of the discussion around the alternate flows because based on their experience, they may know that some other situations may arise from a business perspective. But it's also going to help drive that exploratory data analysis. This is where the data team can go back and make sure that they understand how those core business events are represented, and any discussions around the constraints of the data can be validated within the data at this point. So what about scope? So the business questions relate to scope, the outcomes relate to scope, the core business events relate to scope. Those all help limit scope. But sometimes the way that technologists and product teams see the data, whether they're looking at a business or a technical perspective, is they make different assumptions about what they're going to get. This is where you can start to log things that the product will or won't do. The purpose here is just to align on the boundaries and expectations between the stakeholders and the technologists. Let's say there's we notice that there's a complex technical decision around the data sync. This is where we can make one of those scoping decisions and log it, and maybe have a different information product or a different part of the roadmap that resolves that technical constraint. All right, so this was a lot of theory at this point. So I'm just going to talk through and just kind of walk through breaking down a feature into the business questions and the stories that make them up, because you're probably thinking, yeah, that's all fine and good, but how does this actually work? And here's an example that I'll use. Again, I'm using supply chain data, and I'm using ocean shipping because this is actually where one of the places where I started to cut my teeth within the big data world. And so as a supply chain analyst, I want to know the cost of goods that's behind schedule at the shipping port of Long Beach so that I can take corrective action on contracted shipments. Okay, that looks very much like a product-based story or feature. What are the business questions that I need to ask this? I just put 2 in here, and there's probably many more. But for each shipping company, what is the rolling 2-week US dollar value of products that did not arrive on time to the port of Long Beach? Now, these are very specific business questions. There's probably many more that go with this. But a lot of times what I'll see is I just want to calculate the rolling 2-week value of products that are late. Okay, well, we have a number of other things that are in here. Things that are like Port of Long Beach, the rolling 2-week metric. We'll get into that a little bit later as well. How do I break this down? Actually, let me go back 1 second. One of the things I'll mention is that these 2 questions right here, this is where a lot of times we see stories come out, that these are the actual stories. In my view, these are actually if you're going through the mapping, you're going to find that these are actually features. Because as you try to break this down, you're going to say, well, how do you calculate those things? And then you can start breaking it down into trying to systematically talking through with the product and the business needs. How do you actually answer that question? Well, there are things that are important here, like which bills of lading will have product that will be shipped to the Long Beach. Who is the shipping vendor? When is the contracted arrival for the products? And what's the expected arrival? That helps me determine if it's behind. What is the total US dollar value of product? These are all things that might seem really obvious, but once you dig into the technicals of the data, might actually be very difficult to calculate. And then, of course, then you can get to what is the rolling 2-week US dollar value of late products. And then throughout this discussion, what you might find is, you know what, the total US dollar value is not that important, because I might have some vendors that ship a whole lot of volume. So I'm going to add one other business question, which is, what is the percentage of product that is delayed in the 2-week window? And I might even update my feature to state that. Now I've got the business questions, and these could all potentially be different stories that contribute to this product and answering that first question. But as you're going through and answering all the details from a business perspective, what those questions and how they're answered, you might start to visit alternate flows. This is where your business SMEs are really important and your data SMEs are really important. What happens with a split shipment? Sometimes a shipment on the ocean can be split between 2 different vessels. I might need to answer business question 2 through 5 for each one. What about if the split shipment goes into multiple ports? What if the vessel is redirected due to inclement weather? And other conversations might be, well, I know that the shipment location data is through an EDI feed that only happens roughly once a day. But what happens if that EDI feed is more than 48 hours old? Should I still be alerting based on potential lateness of that product, or should I mark that as a freshness problem within the data? These are all things that contribute to breaking down your story so that they can be achieved within a sprint. Now that we've gone through breaking down and getting to the business part of the product, how does this relate to the technical team? Because the technical team is going to get a lot of value out of all of those conversations. The technical team is also going to be able to start to shape their technical architectures, their data models, their designs, their ingestions, and their transformations. The nice thing is the conversations with the business and stakeholders should have given enough information and hopefully domain understanding to be able to perform these technical activities. And hopefully, throughout this whole process, the data team or the technical teams or the leaders or the architects have been taking copious notes, because this is going to help contribute to rationalizing the technology decisions that you make. So that leads us right to building the product right. So this is actually, once you've defined the product that you're going to deliver, how do I know that it's correct? And as an engineer, I found this question of, is it correct? And how do I know that it's correct? Very difficult. And which is why I try to lean on the product mindset, or at least put myself in some level, in some phase of this thinking to help understand if I knew that I built it right. Let's take those business questions from that original feature. And what I've done here is I've actually highlighted a few things that might be important for the technologist. Bills of lading, a product, shipped to the Port of Long Beach. Okay, how do I define a bill of lading? This is where the technologist is going to be looking at what is a bill of lading. And that might be part of a table that has 50 columns, but the bill of lading and all of the other questions that need to be answered only encapsulate 5 of those columns. And I'm going to explain why that's important here in a second. But I know the things that are required to answer that business question. That's the investment that the business is making. And the last thing is going to be around this rolling 2-week window, something else that I need to figure out and calculate. Now, I've highlighted these because I want to call out something that's incredibly controversial. What I have found is that if you can limit the data that you're delivering to your business team, so whether it's in your dashboard or machine learning model or your tables, your data model, is limited to the things that are tied back to the business questions or the business events that are required. The reason being, not as big of a problem today as it used to be, but more tables means more ingestion and cost. And by cost, I'm talking about maintenance costs, technical costs, storage costs. Storage is cheap, but maintaining those, investigating defects and things like that over time, if you have more data than you need, it's sort of cluttering up the rest of your process and increasing the cost. If you have more columns than you need, that means you're spending more time analyzing the columns. You're ended up writing more code to be able to move those columns into the next data assets. You've got more tests. If you're writing tests for the things that you're moving, you're adding more code for your tests, and your validations are going to be larger because you have more data to validate. From a QA perspective, I look at that and I look at it and I say, if I'm a QA person, I'm going to say, well, you're delivering me 30 columns. I need to validate the rules around those 30 columns. And sometimes organizations will make a trade-off and say, we're going to validate certain columns and we're going to clean those. We're going to focus our data cleansing on only the scope data, but we're going to deliver everything else. That's where a good data dictionary or data cataloging tool might be able to help you to understand the quality and the cleanliness and the governance around the specific columns that you're delivering. But the point here is it focuses your scope. Less scope means less cost, means faster delivery. It does end up with some levels of churn in the end. Now, so what are some of the questions that a technologist at this point can also use to understand what data they need to bring in? Things like, can a bill of lading be split across vessels? Does a bill of lading require products to be associated to it? This is a different way than asking, what is the cardinality between a bill of lading and a product? Is it one to many? Is it many to many? Is it one to one? These two questions are the two versions of that question are very different. And one of the ones, and I'll just get to the bottom here, is how is a rolling 2-week value calculated? I've actually asked this question, and what I've seen from some of the POs is they look at me and they say, what do you mean? Everybody knows how a rolling 2-week value is calculated. But I've actually seen this take a day or two to actually hash this out, because we have to start looking from a technology and a business perspective, look at how those two things mesh together. Like, well, the data from the ship is only coming in every 24 hours. If it's up to 24 hours old, do I need some level of buffer? Is a rolling 2-week calculated to the minute, to the day date, to the hour? What is the granularity of when I start and end that calculation? But this is where the technologists in the business can start to really hash out some of those conversations and get to know the data a little bit better. What this is also going to do is, as the technologist learns more about what the business wants and needs, the business person's also going to start to understand more of the technicals underneath the data, because they're usually going to be looking at data together. So that's the scoping part. What about the mapping? This is a technique that I've used at a number of different times. And really what it is it's helping me to understand that, to make sure that I really deliver the data that I need, and I can analyze the data that I'm bringing in and mapping it back to the business value associated to it. It's also going to help me understand and identify some of the required transactions or transformations, the ingestions that I'll need, some of the constraints, and really some of the calculations. Some of it might be case and if when logic. But throughout this mapping process, it's also going to help you develop and understand what the data quality tests are: nullability, uniqueness, relationships, freshness, many other things around data quality. But also, I'm going to start taking note of the unit tests and some of the functional behavior that I expect out of my system. What this looks like is usually a document that has, I'm going to say, not all of these columns, and it's probably more in a lot of cases, but here's how I map it through. I take and I start with the business field name. So this goes all the way back to that business question and those business events. What does the business call this thing? And maybe this one thing is multiple things, I don't know. But then it's, what is the data contract? So at this point, if I follow the best practice of developing a data contract, what is the field within that data model or that data contract? And this might be multiple fields, because address might make up numerous fields like the street, the city, the state, the zip, those types of things. The data type that's associated with this. And then the other part about this that's really important is, what if you've already brought the data into your data platform? Now I'm going to start mapping the contract to the actual source of the data. If it's already available in my data platform, I'll put that location in the data platform source. So this is like the internal source system. If this value exists, I know that I already have the data available. And if you're following a good product process with good testing, you actually know that this is also trustworthy. But this might be a place where you might have a column for the veracity of the data, where you can mark, is this good data? Is it unknown quality? We're not sure. Might be where you spend some more time doing some data cleansing. Now, if the data is not already in your data platform, this is where I'm going to call it external, but it doesn't mean external to your org. It might just be external to the data platform. But now you might be looking at, what are the systems that I might need? Is it SAP? Is it my CRM? Is it some feed in an FTP server somewhere? This is where you'll list that. Then the source tables or files that this data is going to come from, and the fields on how I get at those particular pieces of data. Now, these columns can change based on the type of data that you have, but what this is doing is it's helping me organize and make sure that what the business wanted, I can systematically map it down to the actual data that I'm going to deliver, nothing more, nothing less. Now, I've often taken this approach with the business person or a data SME or a business SME or all of the above, because as we're walking through this, data people their ideas in their minds are going to start churning around what could happen in the data and what does that mean and how do I write that test and what am I going to need to do here? That's where this conversation is going to help you, or you're going to note down as a part of that conversation the rules that are discovered through that analysis. What are some of the null requirements, uniqueness calculations, uniqueness constraints, some of the calculations for metrics, and what some of the joins might be. This has been a very effective way to translate this and sort of get that pre-work for the code so that when I sit down and start coding, I'm not trying to recall a conversation. Now understand, going back to that scoping controversial topic that I mentioned, if you have more fields than are required and you're going through this data mapping exercise, now you're starting to map fields that you don't even care about. You're spending time analyzing things that you don't need yet. One of the things that I learned early in my career as a software developer, I used to always ask the question, well, what if they want this, and what if they want that? And one of my, I don't know if it was my architect or my manager at the time, I thought was very astutely just stated to me, we'll pay for that and worry about that when somebody wants it. And I thought that was really important. And that was prior to us, moving to an agile process, but that's sort of influenced me here. So how do I know that what I'm delivering is quality? That's the other technical thing that a lot of times when I work with clients, that's one of the first questions I ask. How do you know this is correct? And I'm going to first talk about this from a functional standpoint, because this is so often ignored from a technical perspective. But when you're using a data product mindset, all of those conversations that you previously had are contributing to how you know this is correct. You should be gathering data transformation rules, constraints, and other logic rules that are going to contribute to your code that you're actually going to write. So what we're trying to figure out here is not is the data quality correct? It's really, is the code correct? Is the code trustworthy? One of the things that I work with a lot of teams on is I implement if I want to have trustworthy data, one of the first things that I need to do is I need to write trustworthy code. And that's through unit tests and things like that. Well, how do I discover what these functional quality rules are supposed to be? I can get this from doing the data mapping process where I get the rules and some of that conversation. My data modeling and contracts. Once I've developed those, I have structural rules that I have to make sure that I should be validating. Conversations throughout that entire process with the business SMEs are helping me understand events, relationships, and I should be putting on my data technologist hat in those conversations and being able to understand what those different scenarios might be, and maybe even going and validating and exploring them inside the data sources themselves. But also speaking with the data SMEs, they're going to help with some of the technical nuances based on what they know about the technical data and not just the business data. It really does take everybody having this conversation, because I'm not great at always speaking in business terms, and the business isn't always great at speaking in technical terms, and the data SME might not be always be perfectly savvy in talking about the data platform. Us coming together and having that common language and talking through this is where we start to solve our problems together. One thing that I'll note is, for me, it is my belief that in order for a developer to start writing code, they need to understand the functionality and those data scenarios well enough so they can write database unit tests. I've given a number of talks on test-driven data engineering, and this is something that you might be able to find out there, but there's a lot of places where you can learn about what test automation looks like in the data world. It's very complicated. When I say it's complicated, it's because it's not just testing like you might think about it. And I do state testing is one of those things that's really easy to say, but super difficult to do. There's so many different rabbit holes that you can go down and so many things that are going to trip you up. Unit testing from a data perspective is really difficult. This might be because of the tool or the framework that you're using. It might be because of the skill set or the infrastructure that's required. But there's other types of testing, like the system integration testing and ELT, but then getting into things like, how do we perform user acceptance testing and write those functional tests? How do I do user experience testing? And how am I going to do performance testing? All of these things are much, much harder in the data world, but understanding your product a lot better is going to make these a little bit easier to build and to write. The next part of testing, the next part of testing is around data quality. So this is different than functional. This isn't making sure my code is correct. This is making sure my data is trustworthy. You're going to discover your data quality rules through all of those conversations, and that's why you should be documenting those conversations as best you can. But you're going to learn about your data quality constraints on conversations with your business, doing the data mapping, doing exploratory analysis. So this is where a data SME or a technical data person might be able to use their expertise for that, but also the data SMEs are going to help you understand this as well. One thing that I'll mention is when a technical question does arise throughout this process, when the technical person is doing it, try not to form your questions in terms of joins, nulls, or cardinality, or technical terms. Try to see if you can translate that back to the business events that they're going to understand, because they're going to help you be able to actually solve that problem with you so that you understand the quality points a little better. Some of the quality things that are important, things like freshness, completeness. So is the record complete in the sense that it completely identifies a row? For example, should a person have a first name and a last name? If it's missing the last name, is that a completeness problem? Things like accuracy and consistency are other main ones that you can actually try to implement, but they're difficult to do from an automated perspective. The validity data quality is understanding the business rules and the business constraints around a piece of data. Like someone's age probably should be no less than 0 and no greater than maybe 150. Anything beyond that, we might want to mark that as a validity problem. But again, that's going through the business mapping process is going to help you get to some of those types of data quality constraints. And that also includes the uniqueness. And then the integrity one is, do we have other data assets that I can actually compare the data asset that I'm building? Can I compare that to another data asset somewhere else to make sure that it's correct? Now, what happens going through all this process? I've limited the scope and something change arises. Something like a defect. What about a missed requirement? This one often comes up because we don't know everything up front, but that's what the agile process is all about. And one thing I'll say is, especially when it comes to moving to this process, is that mistakes are going to happen. And one thing in software that I know is that change happens. So what we don't want is one small change within our data asset to create this dumpster fire that burns down the entire data platform. We don't want a mistake or a change to bring down all the other data pipelines and create new sets of issues. For me, that's why we have automation. This is where all of those things up until now, looking at test automation for data quality, for your QA teams, for your unit tests, your functional tests, your performance tests, having all of those things already automated is going to allow you to actually integrate those into a CI/CD or continuous integration, continuous delivery automation process. If you have something like this in place, now when you make changes, you can hopefully discover in a matter of minutes that something went wrong instead of finding out 6 months down the road when somebody says, hey, this report's wrong, and then you root cause analysis that problem. One of the things that's going to be difficult about limiting your scope in particular is that you're going to have schema changes that are going to be difficult to handle. So you want to come up with a good methodology for how do you handle those schema changes, and do you do them in an automated way? Adding a column sounds really easy. Actually, it is really easy. Coding it takes me about 30 seconds. But what happens when I want to move that through an automated CI/CD process so that the code that goes with it, or that the code that actually populates that goes with it? What about backfilling the data? So developing that methodology to be able to handle schema changes is quite important. Now, what you want to do, whether as a developer, is every time you make a code change, you want to make sure you run your tests. So integrate your automated tests as a part of your continuous integration process. And then as you write your data quality tests, have those automated as well. And each time your pipeline runs, or maybe once a day or once an hour, make sure that the data quality tests pass. Now, if your QA team is also able to automate their tests, having them involved throughout this entire process is going to make their job so much easier. So many QA teams I work with are really struggling to figure out what the functional changes are supposed to be and what they're supposed to validate from a data perspective. Using this product strategy, this actually allows them to be a part of that discussion and understand and ask questions from the standpoint of, how am I functionally going to test this? I actually find that to be one of the most valuable conversations, is having somebody who's specifically thinking about tests as a part of my conversations, because it's going to help me understand that functionality as well. But what makes that the easiest is if you're all using a common language, and that is using the business events and the business questions that are defined in your product strategy. All right, that was a lot of journey to go through in 47 minutes, but we made it. But I'm going to summarize a couple of key things coming out of this that I think would probably help you. The first one is, it's probably important for everybody to understand that moving to a product mindset, it's not going to be smooth. It's going to be clunky. You're going to make mistakes, and people are going to get frustrated. Don't count that as failure. From an agile perspective, that's your opportunity to try to shape it so that it makes it better for everyone. And when I say everyone, I do mean including the product owners and the end users, those listed in the personas. Finding clarity on your business and technical data is going to require a lot of collaboration, not siloed exploration. What I usually find is a lot of business teams come up with the things that they want, and then they lob it over the wall to the data team, and then hope the data team comes back with the correct product. That type of handoff, and I've often found to be not very beneficial, because in the end, the user's still not sure how they're going to user acceptance test. And it might not even, you might actually end up with data quality problems with assumptions made by the technical team. I'll be a little bit selfishly honest about this, maybe not selfishly, but self-pointing, is that I also don't always like talking to people. So sometimes I'll just make decisions, and that's a mistake. And I know that that's a mistake, but sometimes I make those assumptions based on what I think I know about the data. Make sure you explore techniques that'll work for your team's skill sets. And I will say this, if you're struggling within your agile process on your data products, if it feels like it's not agile, one, because your user acceptance tests are tough to write, it feels like you're never on the same page with your product owner, or a technical team asks the product owner a question and they're not sure how to answer it, this is where a framework like the Information Product Canvas or one of the other techniques that are out there, but getting to that common business language, it's going to actually start to feel like your product is agile. Your process is going to feel agile, because now you're all able to collaborate, which is the point of agile. is to increase that collaboration and not the confusion. Now, one thing I'll also mention here is an offering that we provide at Improvement called Data Enablement. This is something actually next week you'll hear from Rich, and then at the end of the month you hear from Scott. We all worked on this together, as well as a few other folks. But what this is we were trying to organize all of our thoughts and all of our experiences around how do we make data usable, not just available, and where are those gaps? And some of this is around the product strategy. So we incorporate some of these things for the business understanding, but also what we incorporate into this is a defined methodology for getting from the business understanding to deploying the right thing. So it's all the way from defining the right thing to building it right. And we really believe in test automation, data quality automation, and proper engineering best practices. And so we found that using something like Information Product Canvas or a product framework allows us to do that. Some things we may incorporate into this data enablement are some other processes that we have, like rapid discovery for finding that first, define, prioritize product backlog. We'll use something like this, like the Information Product Canvas for the product definition. And then in the end, what we always try to strive for is proper best practices around engineering with CI/CD, test automation, and things like that. Now, as I wrap up, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that next week, Rich McCraw will be speaking about modern data platforms, Jason Russell on some Power BI techniques and visualization techniques, and then Scott Poulin around large language models. So hopefully you can tune into those over the next couple of weeks. And if you do want to get in contact with me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can engage with Improving through our contact page. But now that I've gotten through that, I hope everybody's still with me, and I hope I spoke not too fast, but got through everything in a way that folks have questions. I'm happy to answer them right now.
Don't currently have any questions in Q&A, but everyone who has a question, please use that bottom middle link to Q&A and ask your question. I'll give everyone a few minutes to type it out. All right, we have our first question. How long does it typically take to a team switching to a product model to get comfortable?
Comfortable is a fairly nebulous term, but I would say the first probably 4 to 6 sprints are pretty choppy. Because it's really difficult for people to build that culture of collaboration and helping to articulate what the functional and the business needs really are is difficult to get from somebody who kind of what they're trying to measure from a business perspective. If they take it if it's second nature to them, it's hard to get out of them. I shouldn't say hard to get out of them. It's hard to get to the details to get that functional part. So I think it's usually clunky for about 4 to 6 sprints. And it probably takes a good 6 months till it's humming the right way, and you really get through that maybe a first quarter of features to really go through enough retrospectives to start to get this product mindset to settle in. Now, to speed that up, one of the things that I focus on is piloting this on a small business objective. So like the one that I used was on shipping and ocean delays. Now I've seen that be as big as I want all the shipping data and all of the things underneath that. But one of the things you can actually get that sped up by having shorter sprints and really having someone who's skilled at breaking down stories into smaller business features. And then you can get that down into maybe instead of 4 to 6 sprints, hopefully within 6 weeks. One of the things that I also have done is in grad school, one of the big things I researched was on agile data products. And so there are other strategies. So having a good coach to help you with that strategy, it's hard to do it alone. If you've got a coach that's helping you through the agile process and the product process, this is going to be a lot easier. But you'll also find is maybe the framework that you start with just doesn't fit, or it's hard to make it make sense. And so it kind of takes time to calibrate around what the right approach is going to be. Good question. I wish the answer was 1 week, to be honest with you, but it's just not.
I'll ask a question of my own that I had since we
Yeah.
have no others. Are you familiar with domain-driven design? Because I see a lot of domain-driven design in your talk about having common language and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I would say, so as what's interesting is I wouldn't consider myself an expert in domain-driven design, but I think there are a lot of parallels. And so Tori, who's a big proponent of that within our office and within our organization, I think they fit really well together. I also, one of the things that this relates to is kind of like domain-driven design is a good theoretical data modeling process where that's really what you're doing is you're walking and talking with the business, walking through the business processes and using those as ways to discover your product. So those things that modelers are skilled at, they still get to use those within this process to be able to engage with the business. The question is being skilled about asking the business questions, but they are they do have a lot of similarities, yes.
Alrighty. Last call for questions.
All right. Seems like we have no more. So, like I said, this was the tip of the iceberg for this particular topic. Getting deeper into it does, it does take some time to get used to it. So, research some of the other concepts, and you can actually get there. And I'd be more than happy to answer questions from anybody that would like to know more about how do I get deeper into that product strategy and how do we break this down and how do we organize our thoughts. So, yeah, thank you everybody for joining. Really appreciate it. This was a very complex topic and it was probably a fire hose. So thank you for bearing with me.
All right. Thank you for speaking, Don. And everyone here, thank you for attending. Hopefully next week you'll be joining us for Rich McCraw as he speaks about modern data platforms and pipelines a long way from ETL. Thank you all. Hope you all have a great day.
Bye now.